welcome to Creating Zola Mondays. We're so happy you're joining us. Thank you so much. Whew, sometime we are in right now, oh my goodness. But one thing we do know, this is Martin Luther King holiday, and so I want to begin by acknowledging him. But before I do that, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Dr. Linda James Myers. I am a past president of ABPsi, as well as Council of Elder Emeritus, Elder of Elders. And we have with us our usual crew and a special guest this back, Dr. George Harold Jennings. And we're so happy to have him back today. So as you know, we're here the first and third Mondays of the month at noon. And our mission of ABPsi is to liberate the African mind, empower the African character, and enliven and illuminate the African spirit. So that's our duty, our job today. Hopefully you were able to join us the first Monday of this month of the new year when we had our special guest, Dr. Jennings. And we were focusing on the American dream or nightmare. We kind of all concluded it was a nightmare. And we also talked a bit about how acculturation and succumbing to menticide was a problem. Today, our focus is going to be on, again, the American dream or nightmare. And boy, is this a nightmare. It's just well, it's not a coincidence, as Dr. Jennings shared with us last time, that 2 days after our show, we have the insurrection in the Capitol. And all of us saw so very clearly the difference between how insurrectionists who are armed and ready to pull a coup are treated by the police and the military, and how Black people are treated when they're peacefully protesting for justice. So for those who weren't woke, they probably are now, and hopefully what we're about today should help people not only stay woke, but also stay woke with a sense of love and peace and connection to that which is greater than ourselves. Because one of the things that we often talk about within the wisdom tradition of African deep thought is that we're more than just this individual form. Actually, we're multidimensional beings that are connected to those who came before us or the ancestors, future generations, nature, and our community. So that being said, I will have our co-host introduce themselves, and then I will introduce Dr. Jennings. Who's going first?
I'm JoJo Hickson. I'm a third-year clinical psych student at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. And I have a clinical interest in racial trauma, so this is right up my alley, and I'm super excited to see where we take the conversation today.
My name is Garrick Bollier. I'm a fourth-year PsyD candidate at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and I'm also the Vice Chair, DC chapter of ABPsi, and the current Eastern Graduate Representative of the ABPsi Student Circle. My clinical interest is working with the Black population, trauma, depression, anxiety, and SMI as well.
Great.
I can hop in next. I'm Evan August. I'm a fifth-year clinical psych doctoral candidate at Fordham University. Also the ABPsi Student Circle Chair and the ABPsi Sawubona Circle Co-Chair. In terms of clinical interest, it's my specialization is in forensics, so I look at racial trauma and how that impacts Black male adolescents. That's my little circle, my little thing.
Okay.
Hey y'all, I'm Robina Onwonga. I am a fifth-year PhD candidate in counseling psychology. I'm also on the ABPsi Student Circle Board. I serve as the communications chair, and my clinical and research interests are around how childhood trauma impacts mental well-being of Black emerging adults later on in their lifespan.
Very good. And I think I'm going to switch up, and rather than introduce Dr. Jennings, I will let him introduce himself.
Okay, well, thank you.
Just doing my job.
I have a long history in academics and I actually retired last year from full-time teaching at Drew University, and thank you, I am not retired from life. I'm living life. I'm in some ways just as active as I was before. I am a professor emeritus of psychology, and I am a theoretical psychologist ever since grad school. Even though I went to a school that did emphasize empirical approaches, I went to Penn State University. But they allowed me to do a dissertation that was mostly theoretical with some empirical quantitative component to it. I like to examine the psyche of individuals as well as the psyche of a nation, in particular the US. And I sort of take a psychodynamic approach, having been influenced by Carl Jung, who himself was influenced by some ancient African ideas. And my career path has taken me along a pathway that has many elements of what I believe ancient Africans and Egyptians have partaken in, and that is taking into consideration the relevance of the cosmos. And there's an ancient principle, as above, so below. And it suggests that there's a relationship between these two realms, and we're living it out. And so some of my work involves the use of what I call geocosmology, and that's actually a thing. Sometimes more commonly it's viewed as expressions or the ways of astrology. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much for being with us today. I am so excited because as we think about the American dream and the impact of social media, the media, and all that's happening today, it's so very important when we think about creating and wielding Zola that we connect to something and broaden our knowledge and our understanding, deepen our understanding, so that we have something that can guide us during these very troublesome times. Before we get into that, though, I want to read something that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in 1967 when he was talking about the requirements for overcoming the trauma of systemic racism, particularly in terms of internalized racism. And he said, requisite our inner transformation, liberating Black people from ideological dependence on the dominant white society, and awareness its philosophy and morals are not holy or sacred, but often degenerate and profane. Also becoming aware that the crudity and cruelty of white society's responses to Black needs is systemic, reflecting an appalling lack of knowledge and appreciation concerning the reality of Black life. King described the inability to question and defy the fundamental precepts of the larger society as the worst aspect of the oppression of Black people, having been coerced and conditioned to see reality through the view of a dominant white ideology and their captors. So I think that's important for us to remember. In 1967, he was sharing these ideas, and it's now 2021, and these ideas are still pervasive, but I'm not sure if en masse, as a Black community, we've really caught up with the negative impact of this white supremacist ideology and its impact on our daily lives. So I'm happy to have us discuss today how all of this is coming together and configuring, not just in terms of our individual forms, which is what the Western white ideology focuses on, but also our multidimensional selves that reaches out to nature and the cosmos, if you will, as we begin to think forward about how we can create and wield Zola in the mix of what's essentially domestic terrorism, that all too often has been directed toward us as Black people? And how do we keep from becoming anxious and nervous and frightened and fearful in a social context where by all rights we could be? But that's not what brought us over 400 years of a similar kind of social context. So our intention today is focus on what are those strengths, what has brought us this far, and how can we rely on that as we go forward. And Dr. Jennings, I know in your work, you talk a lot about not only Pluto's return and Saturn's return and their impact, but you also focus on how we can move through this energy field with love. Can you share a little bit, particularly for people who might not have been with us on the 4th, about Pluto's return in terms of the national chart and going forward?
Okay. Thank you. I too have a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King that I want to make part of the beginning of my talk. And the reason I want to do this is because many of the things that I will be stating today could upset people, make them sad, but they should also be aware, people should also be aware of the energies that are positive and transformative that are also going on and being expressed, even as negative energies are being expressed. Pluto's about, the planet Pluto is about transformation, and it can be about rebirth as much as it can be about destruction. So the quote I chose is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And I'm acknowledging some recent events that we should be mindful of and be aware of the potential power that they have in bringing about favorable transformation. So I do want to acknowledge that the nation is on the cusp of witnessing the ascension of Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, an African-American South Asian and first woman to become Vice President of the United States. I also want to acknowledge the ascension of the Reverend Raphael Warnock, an African-American male, and John Ossoff, a Jewish American male, to the United States Senate from the unlikely state of Georgia. And I want to acknowledge the 81,283,485 votes in the recent US presidential election for President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. And not acknowledging also the proposed creation of that team of the most diverse US presidential cabinet in American history. So keep this quote in mind as I go through what I have to say today. I also want to now jump to the, some of the things that I said last week, because some people are here this week who were not here last week.
Yes.
And so I don't want them to get lost as I move along. So in a few minutes, if I can just have a few minutes to just remind people of certain things. And we're talking about the impact of the Pluto return on the USA's chart. So just like an individual can have a natal chart, everyone has a natal chart. The issue could be that we don't know your birth time, and sometimes you don't know your place of birth. And you need those two factors to help identify a chart and have an accurate chart. We were able to identify a chart for the US because nations as well as entities, when they begin, can have a chart as well. So we do have a chart for the United States, and that chart basically is the starting point for recognizing where all the planets were at the time. And the planets take different amount of time to go around the sun. In the case of Pluto, it's 248 years. And from the birth of the United States in 1776, we are approaching that 248th year. That's the year that Pluto returns. Now, I have on the screen all sorts of things that have been going on over the last 2 years or so, particularly in strong ways. One, we have the coronavirus, and as you will see, that's something that Pluto rules. Pluto rules over viruses. We have a very heightened focus on the economic inequities that exist in this country. And the coronavirus has played a key role in bringing that to our attention. We have, of course, 2020, a year of unrest, social unrest. We had heightened awareness of the Black Lives Movement. We had the tragic death of George Floyd, which fueled the movement even further and even made it a global movement. But all along, we've had issues with incarceration of people of color, especially Black men. So we have a lot of unrest, a lot of issues being brought to the attention of many people in the world who did not give much thought to it. So what is the meaning of a Pluto return? As I said, it refers to the return of the planet to its starting position. And when it returns, it comes to make judgment. Now, I mentioned earlier the idea of as above, so below. These things that we are witnessing, although we can look to the skies, those of us who understand and know how to read planetary patterns, we can see correlations between earthly events in the US and the sky. But keep in mind that it's not that these planets are controlling us, but rather this is what's called synchronicity, according to Jung, which is a way of saying they're related acausally, meaningfully though. And a lot of what's happening is an expression of conflict within our American psyche. We have an American psyche. All of us are part of it. And to the extent that we are part, as we are, of larger groups, those groups play critical roles in the development and the expression of the psyche. So Black people, for example, we have a special role to play in the psyche of America. But also there are other groups that play roles. Sometimes the roles promote unity, sometimes they are opposing, but they represent a dynamic that's being played out.
I'm happy to respond to that point, because historically the role that non-immigrant Africans in the Americas have played in America is toward justice and liberation and civil rights for everyone, irrespective of how we've been so horrifically treated.
Yes, indeed. So each planet has a series of characteristics, and you can name planets and do the research to find out what those characteristics are about. I'm mainly here today to talk about Pluto and its characteristics and what it does. So I've broken this down into the actions of Pluto, how it expresses its energy, such as, I won't read everything here, but it triggers deep inner searching. It reveals the deeply hidden state of ourselves or affairs and things. It purges the undesirable. It brings festering wounds, whether they be emotional, psychological, cultural, physical, and or spiritual, into awareness. It arouses, it evokes, or gives rise to upheaval. It promotes transcendence. However, in order for that to happen, it may need to bring about destruction. Potentially, this is the most destructive of all the planets. What are its rulerships? What does it rule? It rules the unconscious, subconscious mind, the individual subconscious mind, as well as the unconscious mind of a nation. A nation can have an unconscious mind. A nation can be in denial. So the things that Sigmund Freud has written about, and the psychological defense mechanisms, and what Carl Jung has written about, the shadow aspect of personality, all of these can have relevance. Pluto also rules death at any level: physical death, spiritual death, emotional death, real or symbolic, as well as rebirth. And I mentioned earlier such things as viruses, crime, secrets, and the underworld. Now, I want to go to what happened on the 6th. The last time we was together, I had, I don't know if you recall my saying, we were at the beginning, not the middle, not the end of trouble, of the trouble to come. And in many ways, we still are in the early stages of trials and tribulations. So we've heard people use the term protests, saying that on January 6th, there was a protest, and many people who were part of that protest, in quotes, will say that's what they were a part of. But it was not a protest. We know there are examples of peaceful protests. So if you're going to stick with the word protest, then you add more words to describe it or to distinguish it from other types. Peaceful protest is something that occurs, but this was not peaceful. In fact, this particular protest, insurrection, basically bears the marks of a Plutonian-inspired protest. So astrologers will look for certain elements to see what characterizes that particular expression of protest. And one of the striking components of this particular one is the control and manipulation by an authority figure.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, are you kind of like making the connection that because this insurrection happened on January 6th, it was like some astrological thing that's kind of connected to it? Is that?
Absolutely, because we're in a cycle. It started a few years ago. It will strengthen over the next 2 years. And it's not going to be wrapped up until around 2024. And during this cycle, we will see the expression of Plutonian type energies and protests, in quotes, because some people call it that, but they're insurrectionists who are claiming it's protest. It's one of the things we can look for to happen. And what I'm trying to do right now is to give you a sense of how to recognize a Plutonian-inspired protest. And Pluto is about control and manipulation, and usually by authority figure. And you'll hear people in such protests say things like, "We were told to do this. It's not me. I'm just following instructions." And that characterized that particular insurrection. And you have strong and violent upheavals that are triggered by Pluto. And also Pluto rules terrorism. And in this case, we had an example of domestic terrorism. Recognizing it as a Plutonian protest also promotes in our awareness things we should look for and to expect to have revealed at some point, and that is an underlying criminal presence and secretive elements. Pluto has the ability, however, to reveal these things over time. It does so slowly, but the depth of criminality and secret hidden aspects that inspired that insurrection are going to be revealed.
One of the reasons Dr. Jennings said I had began with a quote by Martin Luther King in '67 when he talks about liberating Black people from the ideological dependence on the dominant white society and its philosophy is that a lot of what you're describing here about Pluto and its relationship to what's happening nationally is foreign to us as Black people. It's like, huh? Alien, it makes no sense. It doesn't resonate necessarily, but I think one of our challenges, and certainly one of our goals with creating Zola Mondays is to try to infuse a new way of thinking, a new understanding, very aware that for most of us, astrology and many things African have been demonized and criticized and made appear as though they have no relevance.
Yes. It has a lot of relevance. And I said earlier how the return of Pluto is about judging. It's making a judgment. Now, I speak of it as if it's an entity because it just seems easier to speak of it that way. It's a reflection of inner dynamics within the American people. And what is it returning to judge, and what do the events of the last few years and over the next few years to come point to? It points to America needing to reflect on its original sin. And that original sin has to do with how the government of the United States has treated people of color, specifically indigenous people and African people who have been enslaved. And what's the underlying attitude that was present in those time periods and persists today, which is toxic? It is racism and white supremacy. Now, we see expressions of white supremacy all over the internet and in the media. There's a heightened focus. And when the current president came into office, so too a heightened awareness of the presence of the worst expressions of white supremacy have been revealed. So there is an organization that has looked at white supremacy and has divided its expression, white supremacy and racism, into the overt expressions of it versus the covert. The covert can be viewed as unconscious expressions of white supremacy and or racism. And for those who are maybe just listening in, but they can't see the screen, I'm going to mention some of these things and maybe they will trigger some thoughts for those who are viewing, who may want to respond to some of what's being presented here. But the American psyche has gotten to the point where it will show a negative response to certain types of white supremacy or racist things occurring. For example, if there are lynchings, for example, and we still have them every so often, there is an immediate outcry, oh, this is terrible. Oh, this, we can't have this in society. We can't have burning crosses. We can't have people supporting neo-Nazis. Oh, never say the N-word. Oh, that's a hate crime when it's identified as such. We can't have that. People who do that have to be prosecuted. And certain kind of racist jokes or racial slurs. Oh no, we can't have that. But that's a small group of behaviors and attitudes compared to the greater unconscious expressions of white supremacy and racism, many of which we as Black people and other people of color live with on a regular basis. Hiring discrimination.
When you call these unconscious, do you mean by that they're socially acceptable? Because I don't think that people are unconscious of hiring discrimination.
Well, some of these that I'm reading may be viewed as socially acceptable, even though it's more covert than overt. But some of them are unconscious. So that when some people speak of, when people are in denial of white privilege, for example, you know, or even denial of racism, you know, they, in their mind, they don't see it. They're engaged in behaviors that they cannot view as actually racist. There are certain behaviors that just are these indirect expressions of racism. Bootstrap theory, for example. When a person tells you, oh, you know, you can pull yourself up, you can make it, but they're not expressing the racism that makes it difficult for you to do that. That aspect of their thinking remains unconscious. Also, again, many people who are in position to implement the various types of discrimination, again, they trick themselves into, the actual behavior is discriminatory, but they trick themselves into thinking it's not discriminatory. They use defense mechanisms to trick themselves. So this is what I mean by the use of them being, when I say a lot of these things are unconscious, not all of them. Some of them are simply more socially acceptable, but some of them are unconscious. Your thoughts on that?
Anyone want to speak to that issue?
Yeah, I have a thought that's also, I mean, it's related, but it also is folded into a question, which I kind of want it to be like conversational in a way and hear if this resonates with others. But when you were talking about how Pluto impacts or influences terrorism and white supremacy and these other sins of America, I'm wondering, or of the US, I guess I should say, I'm wondering, because for me, in some ways, it could almost be taken as though it's deflecting blame of what, you know, should be responsibility put on individual people for these covert and overt acts of like white savagery that they're doing, rather than saying that, you know, there's other elements outside of our control that are influencing what they've decided to do.
Yeah, I don't think that's what Dr. Jennings is saying. Is it, Dr. Jennings?
I know it's not what he was saying, but I'm thinking, like, if somebody's listening, or if somebody's listening in, or if we're having a conversation about it, it could almost come off as though, like, well, if it's in the universe that this was going to happen in 2020 or 2021, then what could have been done to stop it? You know what I mean? Like, what could we have done to reverse, you know, our destiny, so to speak?
So I don't want anyone to lose that sense of free will, and the sense that, I mean, you can have planetary aspects occur, and free will, human will is such that human will is what really is what's being expressed. So I want people, rather than say, oh, the universe is going to move us in this direction, we are moving in this direction. And the universe planetary aspects reflect that. So it does keep the, you know, it keeps us from being puppets of the universe when you think of it that way. This is us. We are looking at the American psyche play out, and we are a part of it. And the battle is within like individuals have conflicts. Everybody probably can recognize an internal conflict within them. Both of them, whatever, if it's two things in conflict, they both represent sides of who you are. Well, the American psyche is that way. We are battling other forces within it. We represent one aspect of it. I mean, you can break it down to conservatism versus progressives or liberals. Which side are you on? White supremacy versus inclusion and diversity. Which side are you part of? This ongoing conflict. I'm looking at Eurocentric curriculum, for example. Okay, it's socially acceptable to have a Eurocentric curriculum in many places. They say, what's wrong with this? This is the way it should be. But they're not recognizing the unconscious racism that promotes such a curriculum. So even though some things are covert and socially acceptable, I want you to recognize how there's an unconscious aspect to a lot of this.
I think one of the things I heard in Robina's question, it was a great question, for people who are listening about the role of Pluto in the cosmos, it's not a situation where we could say, Pluto made me do it, or the devil made me do it. No, it's Pluto is an energy field that's going to do what it does, irrespective of what we do. And so all of the things you have listed here as covert white supremacy, we can change. We could have changed. The fact that the America's birth defect, chattel enslavement, has never been acknowledged, there's never been reparations. All of those things are things that can shift how that energy, the transformative energy of a Plutonian cosmic event can change outcome. So I think I'm glad you brought that point up, Robina, because we don't want people to think, oh, irrespective of what we did or do, this thing is going to happen. We determine how it's going to play out. We determine what it's going to look like.
And I too think it's an important question, and I share Dr. Meyer's view, which is, what I am trying to also say. This is us. We're in a position to look at the some people have spoken of the ugly American. We are looking at ourselves, and you could say, oh, that's not me. Well, in many ways, we are each other. And some of us simply do not give in to the worst expression of what we see expressed by other people, but it's still in us.
So Dr. Jennings, one of the things that seems to be true by implication is that although we have this cosmic national event, all of these things are taking place on an individual level within us as we make decisions about what our values and our beliefs and our behavior is going to be. So in some ways, many people may be seeing this Plutonian energy in their own personal lives.
They may very well, yeah, because this is transforming individuals. You are unleashing a Pluto return or a Pluto transit is a way externally of looking at the unleashing of Plutonian energy within yourself. Last time I was here, someone asked about the relationship between astrology and what does this have to do with psychology? And that's when I commented, you are solar system. You are the planets configured in such a way. That's one way of looking at you as a spiritual being. So these are energies that you are releasing within yourself and within our society and collectively.
Jojo, are there any questions from our listeners that we should be thinking about responding to?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. I put some in the chat on Zoom.
Oh, I see.
One read, we must be living on Pluto. What's really changed since our arrival on these soils?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Somebody said, we must be living on Pluto. What's really changed since our arrival on these soils?
One of the things that's changed is that the physical chains are gone, but the mental bondage is in place. Mental bondage is some ways harder to liberate oneself from than the physical bondage. But Dr. Jenny, do you want to speak to that?
Well, you know, we can point to things that have changed for, let's say, Black people or African Americans. But no matter what I point to, it's not enough. It's not the change that needs to have occurred. And the Pluto return emphasizes that. So I know, and perhaps many of you would join me in agreeing, that and there have been movies about this, Sankofa and some other movies more recently. There's one I can't think of, the person, in which if we were swept back to living 200 years ago, we would know, coming from 200 years in the future, that our skin color sets us up for horrific treatment that would almost be inescapable. Today, our skin color sets us up for horrific treatment, for some of us more so than others. No one should be treated horrifically back then or now. There's a better way. And a Pluto return, which again is the release of the energies within us, which promote an awareness within us and brings certain ideas into the conscious awareness of the American people. It makes us see these things more clearly and some of us want to address them, even if we have to do battle with others who rather keep things the same. The potential for destruction comes if this does amount to a battle, and they win.
Dr. Jennings and Natalinda, I was wondering if in the last 15 minutes, I'm also noticing some of us haven't gotten the chance to really participate in a discussion about this yet. So I was hoping that we could, in the last,
please do,
as we cycle through some of the questions, also give some of our thoughts and our takes on the issue at hand. And with that in mind, I take it what you've been saying. So to be honest, like I think a lot of people here know I've never been as much of an astrological thinker. And so I appreciate the diligence that you've had in terms of framing that, in terms of explaining Pluto as a reveal. And so with that in mind, in terms of Pluto revealing different energies, I'm hoping that we could talk about the setting and the ground that was laid for the reveal, right? Like part of what went onto the flyer was talking about, the media and social media and how that's kind of laid bed for what you're talking about in terms of a Pluto reveal. And I think it's very important and necessary, I guess, for us to, I have several thoughts, right? One, in terms of, as we talk about the insurrection that occurred, talking about how the virtual landscape that we're in kind of, again, like to this point, laid the bed for people to really construct or like reconstruct a very severe kind of pervasive type of white reality in which they needed to, which motivated the insurrection in part. And two, and I'm sorry this is a lot, but again, we haven't gotten the chance to hop in just yet. And two, I think one of the things that I guess can be, I saw somebody in the comments was a little confused, is when we talk about like not enough has changed, right, in terms of America, in terms of defeating white supremacy and whatnot. how we can, on one hand, celebrate more Black people being allowed into a white supremacist nation, right? So we could celebrate like a Kamala Harris, we could celebrate a Barack Obama, as if that represents the restructuring of the country, when like fundamentally it might not, unfortunately, right? Because you still have a lot of these racist logics that the country is built upon. And so, to the point in terms of what could actually be done to make this anti-racist, I think is like having more of those, I guess, like more almost like decolonial pushes and conversations, like not celebrating as much a Kamala Harris, but like how do you work with, I think you started out talking about like, how do you work with some native peoples? Like, how do you rethink sovereignty and like manifest that on the soil that we're on? So I say all this to say, this is a lot, but as we talk about a Pluto reveal, I think it's necessary for us to also really ground ourselves in what is it exactly that we are revealing? What's like the landscape?
Yeah, so, yeah.
Excellent point.
Yes, we are the reveal, which is us coming into awareness. The nation coming into awareness is the depth of and the influence and the breadth of racism and white supremacy across so many layers of our society. And the extreme right-wing white supremacists, which has entered the consciousness of many Americans, a few years ago, that wasn't part of their psyche. Okay, that's part of the reveal. The media to the extent it perpetuate lies, okay, and allows for individuals such as the extreme white ring.
Dr. Cole, do you mind, sorry to cut you off, but do you mind taking down your PowerPoint, please, so we can?
Oh, sure.
That's cool.
That allows individuals to connect with each other and put out information. We saw how cutting off that type of exchange has dropped, not necessarily in what the actions may end up being, but the chatter, okay, that's gone now at the level that it was at. So these have been tools of racism, and the racism is everywhere, and that's part of the reveal. The racism is far beyond what, maybe it may not be far beyond what you think or I think, but it is far beyond what many think or have thought. And so therefore it's an occasion for many to awaken.
Part of what I hear you asking about too, Evan, is what do we do? Where's the clarity around our own cultural frame in this context? Because clearly the media still calls this insurrection riot. Social media was a platform that the white supremacists used together and negotiate the whole insurrection. And dismantling the weapons of mass destruction also has to include not only addressing the role media and social media plays, but we have to begin to get clarity in our own minds. It's great that we have Biden and Kamala, but as compared to Trump, but it's still not getting us where we need to go in terms of our own liberation and the diminution of white supremacy. So I think for me, the beauty of the Plutonian argument is we will get beyond just, oh, now we see, to not only do we see, we're very clear about the values that we want to perpetuate, the educational system we want to support and foster. All of those things are going to emerge, hopefully, out of this reveal.
Yeah, you know, in terms of more practical examination of racism and where we've been and where we are and where we're going, So we're not going to be able to really address that adequately in the time we have left. But there are books. I would just like to name a few of the books that I recommend people consider looking
Yeah,
at.
Dr. Jennings, I would love you to name some of the books. And then if after that, again, because we are running out of time, if we could get everybody's take
Sure.
on the subject at hand as well.
Okay, I can do the books later, or I can do them quickly. But one is Professor Kendi. Okay.
Are you getting
How,
on racism? You know,
yes, how to be anti-racist.
Yeah.
Um,
We've done a couple of programs on racism and getting over racism. Can we quickly move to getting other people's responses?
sure.
And we can actually put the books on the chat if we want to.
So again, I guess like to reframe, right? We kind of discussed, and Nana Linda, you made a point about like our cultural reframe and how that can be used as an intervention, more or less. Is that accurate?
Absolutely essential, in my opinion. We've got to somehow move to a place where we go back to our own cultural traditions, because at some point we have to realize what they have presented, as I had read from Martin Luther King in '67, is toxic. It's not healthy for us. Doesn't work.
Yeah. And no, so with that in mind, I was going to say, like, Garrick, Jojo, Robina, if you guys had any thoughts on that specific point that you wanted to, share.
Yeah, nah. So I feel like a lot of things being discussed, you know, when it comes to, like, especially with the quote like Nana Linda said, I think the discussion is like, how can I phrase this? We can't, like, the whole foundation of what America is was not meant for us, like literally, like it's not. So like, I get, you know, trying to have the Kamalas and the Obamas in the system, but the system itself is toxic, you know? So like, we're having people that's helping us, but it's in a toxic system. So we're not necessarily getting anywhere. We're not really progressing, I think, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I think the only way for us to be truly liberated is to like either like have our own space, like to like literally leave. I don't know how that can happen. I mean, unless we all get our passports and dip, but realistically, that's literally because this system literally isn't for us. So like American Dream or Nightmare, I feel like some of us, I think some Black people can look at it as a dream because, you know, how far they've came in like relative to like their ancestors, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like they've made that progress and they're living their ancestors' dream, but I feel like our ancestors' dreams was really just to be like literally free. Like they couldn't even be able to have a dream, you know what I'm saying? To have like dreams of becoming a doctor or becoming president, or, you know, like their dream was literally to be free. So it's just like, I don't know, just looking at everything is just, and then applying the whole like Pluto and that stuff. It's just I don't know. It's a lot, but I feel like we've known this. I don't know how. Like I'm still trying to grasp the connection of everything, but I don't know. It's just a lot. I feel like,
So I would say this. Imagine some 30 years from now. So this is a thought experiment. What if things for your children or grandchildren turned out to be so much better, closer to what you would hope it would be like? What I'm saying is, if that day arrives, and I hope it does, it will be in large measure due to our presence in this time and the years that follow. We have a role to play. America is an idea. And it professed to be a certain way. And it is being challenged to be that way. And if you are not, you have to start over. You have to have certain things eliminated. And that's what I like how we have started referring to Pluto as the great reveal or revealer, because that's what it is about. So I agree with you. You could, in your sentiment that maybe this is not the place for us. We're here as spiritual beings for a reason. We don't just haphazardly fall upon the earth plane. We are here for, this is a spiritual truth that I'm hoping to convey to you. We are here for a reason, not only as individuals, but as a group. Our ancestors have dwelled where they have dwelled on earth for a reason, and we have followed them. We have a role to play. And we are here to be responded to, ideally more favorably, the better, the sooner the better, but a role to play nonetheless, so that down the line, it would be better.
Jojo, Robina, Evan, other thoughts before we
Yeah,
go?
sure. So many, but I'm thinking about one of the comments that someone made was about, we need to change the laws. And I think back to a clip that actually Evan and I have shared this on the Students of Black Psychology, which is the ABPsi Student Circle Instagram. And it's a clip with Dr. Amos Wilson, who's a Black psychologist, and he talks about how the laws of this land aren't sacred because they were created to maintain self-interest, and they really only matter when they can be enforced their way or manipulated for, to their advantage. So that's something that I think of in terms of like the change that we as Black people are trying to see in this, USA, which is, just corrupt from its not even inception, but when they kind of stripped it from the indigenous people. So I think of that. And then I think of events that like what happened last Wednesday, and how, in a way, as Black people, we are already doing our part by trying to heal ourselves and lift our people up. And I believe that white people should be held responsible and accountable for the things that they do, and rectifying or doing whatever they need to do to make right what they've done. Because stuff like what happened on Wednesday, I understand the whole concept of we are one and we're all, living on this land together, but there's certain things that is not necessarily our business to try and fix, because that's what they did, and they need to, be able to come to terms with and put a mirror to themselves about who they are and how they're destroying this country that they claim to love.
Jojo?
Yeah, there was so many complex statements said in the conversation. I don't have much to say by way of closing out, except for social media. I feel like it's kind of a double-edged sword, because while it has played a large hand in making people conscious of like the racism that we were already privy to, I think that it's also desensitizing folks to seeing like Black bodies in the street like it's normal, and it's definitely not. Like, we shouldn't have to see our ancestors constantly dying on social media like it's normal. It's very dehumanizing. And so I think that that's the only comment I really had.
No, so I think there's a lot of like really great, really interesting, and really powerful points that are being made. And again, like this is Zola Monday, so I'm hoping these are threads that we could pick up and carry and continue to dance with, as Dr. G would say, like that we could dance with as we move on. So yeah, I always enjoy being in conversation with everybody here.
Likewise, and we're so thankful that we had Dr. Jennings. He introduced something that's not commonly discussed in these circles. So hopefully people have been introduced. And the role that we've always played as non-immigrant Africans in the Americas has always been toward that arc of justice. We've been at the forefront of every movement to make America try to be what it says it wants to be. And going forward, my guess is, if it's going to become what it says it wants to be, we'll be the ones who are the drivers who are pushing it, because
we have a tremendous role to play. We have a tremendous role to play.
Yes, yes, we do.
And one could say our souls recognize this.
The soul of America is on the line, and our souls have delivered it to this point for good. And we will carry it forward. And having said that, That's why we're creating and wielding Zola on Zola Mondays. Just be at peace and have that love, that tranquility, and a sense of productivity, so that you can be uplifted on that frequency that's going to carry you forward in the face of this insanity. Closing thought, anyone? If not, we'll just say we're so happy you were with us today. Please come back next month. We will be back on the first Monday of February, and we love you so much. Peace and blessings.